The ballroom had never been so quiet. Dante Vescari reached up with one hand, no hesitation, so ceremony, and unclasped the black onyx lion from his own neck. 4 generations of Vescari blood had worn that pendant. 4 generations of men who built their power on loyalty, on silence, on the understanding that certain things were sacred. Dante held it for one breath, then turned to Sabrina Vale in her red dress and placed it around her throat like it meant nothing. Like his wife wasn't standing 12 feet away. Like every captain, every underboss, every man in that room wasn't watching Elena Marlowe Vescari's face for the moment she broke. She didn't break. She raised her champagne glass. She smiled. Not the tight survival smile of a woman, swallowing humiliation, something quieter. Something that looked almost like relief, and nobody in that room could figure out why. If you felt your blood pressure rise, watching that you're in the right place, subscribe to our channel and hit the like button so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city or country in the comments. Let us see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it really started. 3 weeks before the night of the pendant, Elena was in the basement office of the Vescari Holdings building on Meridian Street, going through accounts that weren't adding up. She had a cup of coffee at her elbow that had gone cold 2 hours ago. The fluorescent light her desk buzzed above her desk buzzed with that particular frequency that gives people headaches if they sit under it long enough, and Elena had been sitting under it for 4 years. She was good at tuning out things that were meant to wear her down. The numbers in front of her were clean, too clean. That was the problem. Dante had moved 3 accounts from the Meridian Street ledger into a secondary holding structure 2 months ago. He'd told her it was a tax restructuring routine, handled by their accountant Marco. Nothing she needed to think about. Elena had nodded. She had not stopped thinking about it since. She pulled up the secondary structure. The money had moved again, and again. And then it had stopped moving entirely, sitting in a holding account in a name she didn't recognize, Crestline Ventures LLC, with no operational history, no business activity, and an address that, when she looked it up, turned out to be a UPS store in New Jersey. Elena wrote the name down on the legal pad beside her keyboard. She underlined it twice. She heard Dante's car in the lot above her, the particular sound of that engine, the way he always gunned it slightly coming off the ramp, and she closed the account window. She put the legal pad in the second drawer, under the insurance files where he never looked, picked up her cold coffee, and drank what was left of it. By the time Dante came down the stairs, she was going through the restaurant receipts. "You're still here," he said. Not a question, not warm, just finishing up. He didn't look at her. He went to the safe in the back wall and did something with the dial, his body angled away. Elena watched the back of his neck. She had learned to read him from the back of his neck, the way he held it when he was relaxed, the way it went rigid when he was hiding something. Right now it was somewhere in between. "Sabrina's going to need access to the Cordova accounts," he said. Starting next week, Elena set down the receipt she was holding. "The Cordova accounts are operating capital. I know what they are. She's not a principal. She's not on any of the... I'm making her a principal." He turned around then. His face was the version he used when a decision had already been made, and the conversation was purely procedural. "It's handled, Elena. I'm not asking." She looked at him. She thought about the name Crestline Ventures LLC written in the second drawer under the insurance files. "Okay," she said. He left 20 minutes later without saying goodbye. Elena sat at her desk for a long time after she heard his car leave. Then she opened the second drawer and took out the legal pad and stared at what she'd written. She picked up her phone and texted a number she hadn't used in 8 months. "I need a favor." Nothing loud. The reply came back in 4 minutes when she typed now. His name was Carver, just Carver, no last name anyone used, and he'd worked for the Vescari family for 11 years before Dante decided he was too old to be useful. Elena had disagreed with that decision quietly, and she had continued to pay Carver from a budget line. Dante didn't look it closely, not out of sentiment, out of the understanding that men Dante had discarded still had eyes and ears and old loyalties, and that those things had value. They met at a diner on Fulton, in a booth at the back where the vinyl was cracked and the coffee was better than it had any right to be. Carver was 63, built like he'd been welded together by someone who believed in structural integrity over aesthetics. He had a broken nose that had healed slightly crooked, and hands that looked like they'd been used as tools, which they had. He sat across from Elena and watched her without expression while she told him what she needed. Crestline Ventures, she said, New Jersey shell. I need to know who set it up and who's behind it. When did you find it? Tonight. It's been moving Dante's money for 2 months. Carver's jaw moved slightly. Not chewing anything, just that thing he did when he was processing information he found irritating. You think it's him or someone using him? I think the answer to that question is the most important thing I've learned in 4 years of marriage. He drank his coffee. Give me 48 hours. You have 24. He looked at her across the table for a moment. You look tired, Mrs. Vascari. I am tired, she said. That doesn't change anything. 48 hours later, she'd given him 48. In the end, because she was pragmatic, Carver called her from a blocked number and gave her a name, Durain. Elena sat in her car in the parking structure beneath the Meridian Street building and let that name settle into her body the way cold water settles into cloth. Victor Rain was not a small problem. Victor Rain was Dante's oldest rival, a man who had been trying to find a seam in the Vascari organization for a decade and had never managed to locate one. He was patient in the way that men who have waited a long time become patient, not calm, not resigned, but coiled, waiting, and somehow he had gotten Crestline Ventures into the Vascari accounts. How deep, she asked. 3 accounts confirmed, Carver said, possibly more. He's been routing through the shell for 8 weeks. Small amounts at first testing to see if anyone noticed. When no one did, he got bolder. Someone on the inside helped him set it up. That's what it looks like. Elena thought about Sabrina Vale, about the Cordova accounts, about Dante's neck going rigid at the safe. Is it Dante? She asked. Is he doing this willingly? A pause. Carver was careful with pauses. He only used them when the truth was complicated. I don't think he knows, Carver said. I think he's being played. But I can't prove that yet. Then keep pulling. She ended the call and sat in the dark parking structure for a while. Above her, somewhere in the building, her husband was probably on the phone with Sabrina Vale, probably telling her about the Cordova accounts. Elena opened the glove compartment and took out the key she kept there. It was an old key, cut from a blank that didn't exist commercially. You had to know a specific locksmith in Baltimore who owed the Vascari family a very old favor. He opened a safety deposit box in a bank branch on Commerce Street, and the box contained a sealed ledger that Dante had given her 4 years ago, on the day after their wedding, with instructions she'd memorized word for word. If anything happens to me, this goes to Marco. If Marco can't be trusted, it goes to the captains in order of seniority. If none of them can be trusted, Elena, use your judgment. She hadn't understood at the time what it fully meant. She understood it now. She put the key back in the glove compartment and drove home. The trouble with Sabrina Vale, the thing Elena kept coming back to as she tried to map the edges of the problem, was that she didn't fit the shape of a woman who'd be useful to Victor Rain. Sabrina was Dante's mistress, and Elena had known about that for 14 months. She hadn't done anything about it because doing something loud would have cost her standing with the captains, and standing with the captains was the only currency she actually controlled. So she had filed it under things I am managing and kept working. But a useful asset for Victor Rain would need to be someone embedded, someone with access, someone Dante trusted enough to bring inside the operational structure. Sabrina, until 2 months ago, had been kept at a very deliberate distance from anything business-related. Dante had been careful about that, whatever else. He wasn't stupid. So what changed 2 months ago? Elena pulled Sabrina's background. She used a contact at a private investigation firm that did work for the Viscari family on legitimate business matters, pulled it as a due diligence inquiry for a potential vendor, which was the kind of paperwork that didn't raise flags. The report came back in 3 days. Sabrina Vale, 34 years old, born in Cincinnati, finance degree from Ohio State, 7 years of legitimate work history at 2 mid-size investment firms. Clean record. Nothing. Elena looked at the clean record for a long time. People in Dante's world did not have clean records because they were innocent. They had clean records because someone had worked to make them clean. She dug into the Ohio State years through a different channel, a woman she knew who had access to university administrative records through a data vendor most people didn't know existed. Took a week and cost Elena $2,000 and a favor she'd been holding on to for 2 years. What came back was interesting. Sabrina's roommate junior year had been a woman named Christine Rain, Victor Rain's daughter. Elena sat with that for a full day before she decided what to do with it. She did not go to Dante. She thought about it and discarded it within about 6 seconds. Because if Dante was being played, which Carver believed, and which the money moves had suggested, then the worst thing she could do was show her hand before she understood the full shape of what was being done to him. And if Dante was not being played, if he knew about Victor and was working with him, for reasons Elena couldn't yet see, then showing her hand would be worse. Either way, she needed more information before she moved. She requested a meeting with Sabrina herself. She kept it simple, sent the request through Dante's assistant with a note that said Elena needed to discuss the handover of the Cordova account. Information administrative, routine, nothing alarming. She chose a restaurant Dante didn't use, in a neighborhood he rarely visited, at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, when she knew he'd be in a meeting with the lawyers from downtown. Sabrina arrived 10 minutes early. Elena noticed that immediately, the kind of thing you notice when you're paying attention to everything. She was dressed conservatively, a gray blazer over a black shirt, minimal jewelry. She looked like someone who had thought carefully about what image to project for this meeting. Elena had dressed carefully too. She wore nothing that signaled distress. She wore nothing that signaled aggression. She wore a dark navy pantsuit that said, "I am a woman conducting business, and I am entirely in control of this conversation." They sat down. The waiter came, and Elena ordered water and a salad she wasn't going to eat. Sabrina ordered coffee black. They looked at each other across the table. "I appreciate you coming," Elena said. "Of course." Sabrina's voice was steady. Her hands, wrapped around the coffee cup when it arrived, were also steady. She was good at this, wherever she'd learned it. "I want to talk about the Cordova accounts," Elena said. "But I also want to talk about Christine Rain." Something moved through Sabrina's eyes. Not panic. Something more controlled than panic. Recognition. The look of a person who has been waiting for a specific door to open and is now watching it open. She put down her coffee cup very carefully. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough," Elena said. "What I need to understand is which side of this you're actually on." Sabrina looked at her for a long moment. The restaurant was quiet around them. Lunch rush not yet started, only 2 other tables occupied, a couple by the window, and an old man reading a newspaper by the door. "I'm not on Victor's side," Sabrina said. "I've never been on Victor's side. Christine Rain was your roommate for 2 years. I know who Christine Rain is." A pause. "I also know what Victor did to my family 15 years ago. And I know exactly what he's been doing to Dante's organization for the last 8 weeks. Elena looked at her steadily. She'd been watching people lie to her for 4 years in this world. She knew the tells, the micro-expressions, the throat clears, the way a person's eyes move when they're constructing rather than recalling. Sabrina wasn't constructing. "Tell me," Elena said. What Sabrina told her took 40 minutes and 3 cups of coffee and left Elena sitting very still in her chair, processing. Victor Rain's plan, as Sabrina laid it out, was not what Elena had assumed. She'd assumed it was a financial raid, strip the accounts, leave the Vescari organization destabilized. Standard hostile takeover methodology. She'd been thinking about it wrong. Victor wasn't trying to take the money. He was trying to take the structure. The accounts were a distraction, small enough bleeds that they'd be found eventually, large enough to create a crisis when they were. While Dante and his people were focused on the financial damage, while trust inside the organization was fracturing along the fault lines. Victor had been quietly mapping for 10 years. Victor's people were going to move on 3 of the Vescari's most critical operational relationships: Port Authority contact, the city councilman on the zoning committee, and the detective at the organized crime unit who had been, for 6 years, quietly making certain files went nowhere. Take those 3, and the Vescari organization didn't just lose money. It lost its ability to function. It became visible, vulnerable, prosecutable. And then Victor stepped in to pick up the pieces at whatever price he chose to name. When? Elena asked. He needs the organization distracted first. He's been working on that. Sabrina glanced down at her hands. The pendant ceremony was supposed to be the catalyst. Dante publicly humiliates you captains. Start to question his judgment, loyalty fractures. Victor gives it 2, maybe 3 weeks for the internal damage to compound, and then he moves on the 3 relationships. Elena thought about the ballroom, about the pendant around Sabrina's neck. You knew it was going to happen, Elena said. The pendant, yes, and you let it. I had to appear to be Victor's asset, Sabrina said. If I'd refused or warned Dante, Victor would have pulled back, and I'd have lost everything I'd built inside the access structure. I've been inside this for 8 months. Her voice stayed level, but Elena could hear the cost in it, the weight of 8 months of carrying something alone. Took the pendant because I knew you'd figure out what it meant before Dante did. Elena looked at her across the table. The relics compartment, Elena said quietly. Sabrina met her eyes. You know about it. I've known for 4 years. Dante gave me the ledger, but he never told me there was a second piece. Elena paused. You were supposed to expose that. Vic thinks the pendant is just a symbol. He doesn't know about the compartment. If he'd known, he'd have had someone examine it the moment I put it on. Sabrina's jaw tightened. I needed you to see me wearing it. I needed you to understand that I wasn't the enemy. And I needed you to move before Dante did something irreversible. Elena folded her hands on the table. Outside the window, the street was ordinary, a city moving through a Tuesday afternoon, completely indifferent to the geography of power being redrawn inside a quiet restaurant. There's something else, Sabrina said. Elena looked at her. Victor has someone inside the captains. Someone who's been feeding him information for over a year. I don't have a name. I've been trying to identify them for 3 months. But whoever it is, they know enough about your internal structure to guide Victor's timing. She paused. He's going to move in 10 days. Maybe less. Elena was quiet for a moment. Can you get me everything you have? She asked. Documents, communications, the money trail from Crestline Ventures, everything. It's already assembled. Sabrina reached into the bag beside her chair and produced a small flash drive, which she placed on the table between them like an offering. I've been waiting for this conversation for 6 weeks. Elena looked at the drive. She did not pick it up immediately. If I take this, she said slowly, and I move against Victor, Dante is going to realize what you've been doing, and he is not going to understand it charitably. I know. He may not forgive it. I know that too. Something shifted in Sabrina's face, not quite grief, but the cousin of it. I didn't do this for Dante. Elena studied her. Why then? Sabrina was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was even but not quite steady. Victor destroyed my father's business when I was 19. Left us with nothing. I've been watching him do it to other people for 15 years, and I got tired of watching. She looked at Elena directly. And because whatever Dante did to you in that ballroom, you're the only person in this city who actually understands how this organization works. If Victor wins, it doesn't just hurt the Vescari family. It poisons everything he touches afterward. I need him stopped. Can stop him. Elena reached out and picked up the flash drive. She put it in her jacket pocket and stood up. Stay close to Dante, she said. Don't change anything. Don't give Victor any signal that the plan has changed. Sabrina nodded. One more thing, Elena said. She picked up her water glass and looked at Sabrina steadily. If you're playing me, if any part of this is a misdirection, I will know. And it will be the last thing you do in this city. I know, Sabrina said simply. Elena set down the water glass and walked out of the restaurant. She sat in her car for 6 minutes and let herself feel the full weight of what she was now carrying. The ledger in the bank, the key in the glove compartment, the flash drive in her pocket, and 10 days to dismantle a man that her husband had been afraid of for a decade. Then she started the car. She had work to do. 7 days. Dante had agreed to 7 days the way a man agrees to something. He's already half decided to break mouth, saying yes, while the rest of him is calculating when the agreement stops being useful. Serafina knew that. She'd factored it into everything she planned to do next. She slept 4 hours that first night, spent the remaining dark hours at the kitchen table with the legal pad and a cup of coffee that went cold before she was halfway through it. Timeline on the wall in the study was the public version, the one Dante could see, and therefore the one she was comfortable letting him see. The real timeline was in her head, and it was more complicated, and it had a name at the center of it that she wasn't ready to say out loud. The name was Philip Crane, Dante's accountant, nervous, loyal, financially dependent, 22 years with the family, a man so thoroughly embedded in the Veyron operation that nobody looked at him anymore because he'd become part of the furniture. Serafina had looked at him. She'd been looking at him since the 2nd month of her marriage, when she'd noticed that Philip had a habit of being in hallways he had no professional reason to be in, and a habit of asking questions that were slightly off-center from what he actually needed to know. Filed it away the way her mother had taught her, not used, just held. What had changed was the shoes. 3 weeks before the gala, Philip Crane had shown up to a household financial review wearing shoes that cost somewhere between $800 and $1,000. She'd looked them up that evening. He made a good salary, a very good salary, but not $800 shoes salary, not if you also had a mortgage in Westchester and a daughter in private school, which Philip did. She checked. She didn't tell Dante this. Not because she wanted to protect Philip, she didn't, particularly, but because Philip wasn't the thing that mattered. Philip was a tool. What mattered was who was using him and why. And she was 4 days into understanding that when the second piece arrived, it arrived in the form of a phone call to Marco Resti that Marco almost certainly didn't know she was aware of. She wasn't wiretapping. She wasn't surveilling. What she'd done 3 days earlier was ask Gregor to log all calls made from the estate's landlines, a reasonable security request given the circumstances, and she'd noticed that Marco's number appeared twice in the log for calls made from the study. Dante's study. Not unusual in itself. What was unusual was the timing. Both calls had been made at 2 in the morning, on nights when Dante was supposed to be asleep. She'd sat with that for 24 hours before she understood what it meant. Dante wasn't sleeping. Dante was making calls at 2 in the morning to his most senior captain and not telling her about them, which meant Dante knew something he hadn't told her, or suspected something he wasn't willing to voice, or was moving on something independent of the 7-day agreement he'd made. She'd given him the 7 days in good faith. She'd expected him to give her the same. She found him at 9 in the morning in the estate's main sitting room, which was where he took his first coffee of the day, when he was thinking, standing at the window with the cup in one hand and his phone in the other, looking out at the long driveway with the focus of a man who wasn't actually looking at anything. His security was stationed in the outer hall. She closed the door behind her. "You called Marco at 2 this morning," she said. He didn't flinch. She gave him credit for that. He absorbed it and turned, and his face was doing the controlled thing. But underneath it, something tightened. "How do you know that?" I asked Gregor to log the landlines. "You knew I did. I thought you meant for incoming calls." "I meant for all calls." She sat down across from him. "What did you tell him?" "That's between Marco and me, Dante." She kept her voice flat. We agreed you'd have 7 days to work this your way." His voice sharpened slightly. "We didn't agree I'd stop running my own organization. You're going to push too hard, and the traitor is going to go underground, and we're going to lose the thread." She held his gaze. "I told you, whoever this is isn't trying to destroy you. They're trying to reshape you. If you come in swinging, they get exactly what they want. And if I sit on my hands for 7 days, while someone moves pieces around my board, I look weak." "You don't look weak. You look patient." "In this business," he said, "those are the same thing." She stared at him. He stared back. Outside, a car moved slowly down the driveway, one of his security rotation, and neither of them looked away from each other. "What did you tell Marco?" she said again. He set down the coffee cup. "I told him to put out word that we were looking for Curtis, the maintenance man." Her stomach dropped. Not dramatically, she was too controlled for dramatic. It was a quiet, specific dropping sensation, like something had shifted 2 inches to the left. "Dante, if Curtis runs, then whoever sent him knows we've found the thread. Curtis leads us to whoever sent him. He won't. He'll panic, and he'll run, and he'll be in a car to the airport within 48 hours if he isn't already." She stood up. "Just cut the timeline in half." He didn't look sorry. He looked like a man who'd made a calculation and stood behind it. "Then we move faster." She wanted to say something sharp. She held it back, barely, and turned toward the door. "Serafina." She stopped but didn't turn around. "I know you think you're the only one who's been paying attention," he said. His voice was quieter now, and something in it was rougher than the controlled version. "You're not. I've been watching this house for 6 months. Something feels wrong about it, in a way I can't explain to you, and I can't sit across a table from it for 7 days and wait." Turned then. He was still standing at the window, and he looked, for just a moment, like a man who was genuinely tired, not the kind of tired that comes from not sleeping, but the deeper kind that accumulates. "What feels wrong?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Like someone who knows exactly how I think is using it against me." A pause. "That's a short list." She looked at him. "I know." She left before he could ask her anything else. Curtis was gone by noon. Gregor brought her the news in the kitchen, where she was eating a sandwich she wasn't tasting, and she absorbed it without saying anything for a long moment. "When did he leave?" "Best we can tell, this morning. Early. His landlord says he put a cash deposit down last month, and the lease had a 60-day exit clause he exercised yesterday." Gregor's voice was carefully neutral. He was good at neutral. He knew we were looking before Marco made any calls. She set down the sandwich. "Which means someone warned him before Dante made that call last night." Gregor was very still. "Which means there's a second source in this house," she said. "Not Philip. Someone faster. Someone with access to Dante's decisions as they're being made." She looked at Gregor. "Who knew about the plan to look for Curtis before Marco was called?" "Myself," Gregor said slowly. "The Don 2 of his personal guard, Bassett and Cruz." He paused. "And whoever was in auditory range of the study between 11 and midnight." She thought about the layout of the study, the hallway outside it, the access points, the interior spaces. "Pull the video for that hallway. Tonight's footage, last night's going back 5 days." "Already started," he said. "After you asked about the East Corridor server." She looked at him sharply. "You thought of it already. Thought something was off with Bassett 3 weeks ago." His voice was still neutral, but she could hear something beneath it The discomfort of a man who dismissed his own instinct and was now calculating the cost of that. He had a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear, on his personal phone, in the parking structure. What did you hear? Gregor hesitated. Not from reluctance, from precision. Being precise. 3 words, he said. Not her yet. Kitchen was very quiet. Not her yet, she repeated. I thought it was personal. A phone call with someone he was. I assumed it was personal. She was already thinking 3 steps ahead, moving through the implications, the way you move through a room you've memorized in the dark. Not her yet, which meant her, specifically, which meant someone had given instructions about Serafina. Hold off on whatever was planned for her. The timing wasn't right. Meant she'd been factored into this from the beginning. Not as a bystander, not as collateral, as a variable, something to be managed. Where is Bassett now? She said. Morning rotation. He's on the east gate. Keep him there. She stood up and pushed back from the kitchen table. Don't pull him in. Don't make any changes to his schedule. He can't know we've connected him. She looked at Gregor. Can you do that without it reading as unusual? Yes. Good. She started toward the door, then stopped. Gregor, why are you telling me this instead of Dante? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because you asked the right questions first. She nodded and went to find Philip Crane. She found him in his office on the 3rd floor. A room full of filing cabinets and dual monitors, and the particular smell of a space where someone spends too many hours old coffee and paper and recirculated air. Philip looked up when she came in, and the precise quality of his surprise told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't startled to see her. He was startled to see her here now, at this specific moment, which meant he'd been expecting something and wasn't sure if this was it. She sat down across from him and didn't say anything right away. She'd learned that silence was a better opening than a question. People filled silence. Philip filled it by shuffling papers he didn't need to shuffle. I've been going through the access logs on the financial files, she said. The ones that were copied. Yes, terrible business, Philip said. I've been trying to help Gregor's team understand the architecture of... You accessed the routing files 4 times in the 2 weeks before the gala, she said. Twice at normal hours. Twice at 6 in the morning, before anyone else was in the office. He looked at her. His face did something complicated, too many micro-expressions happening at once. Suppression fighting with the basic human wiring that makes people bad at lying to someone who's already looking for it. I was doing quarterly review, he said. The gala timing overlapped with the audit cycle. The audit cycle runs to the 15th, she said. The files you accessed early were from the November routing set. Current audit is on the March accounts. He was quiet. Philip. She kept her voice entirely without aggression. Aggression would make him defensive. She needed him scared. Not defensive scared people talked. Defensive people shut down. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because whatever they offered you, whatever you agreed to, the situation has changed in ways they probably haven't told you about. His jaw tightened. His hands flat on the desk, pressed slightly harder against the surface. I don't know what you're... They made you copy documents that gave them a map of this organization, she said. And now I need you to understand something about what you helped them build. She leaned forward slightly. They don't want to destroy this family. They want to run it. And you help them figure out how. Philip said nothing. That makes you very valuable to them right now, she said. It also makes you a liability the moment this plays out. You know that, don't you? His breathing had changed. She could see it, the slightly elevated pace, the way his chest was moving in a pattern that was no longer fully controlled. He was a nervous man operating at the edge of something he couldn't back out of, and some part of him had known for a while that couldn't back out of it. Who approached you? She said. He looked at the door. She didn't look at it. She kept her eyes on him. No one is coming in, she said. It's just us. A long moment. Then quietly, like something collapsing, he said it would just be records. that no one would get hurt. He, she said. Who is he? Philip looked at his hands. His name, he said, is Vincent Ray. She knew the name. She'd known it for 3 days. Vincent Ray was Dante's second cousin Aldo Veyron's nephew by his sister's marriage, and he held a senior administrative position in the family's legitimate business holdings, which gave him access to financial records, legal documents, and the held of information that looked innocent, the kind and tarned innocent until it was assembled into something that wasn't. He was 53, meticulous, deeply embedded, and he had been quietly furious about Aldo's decision to pass the Don's position to Dante, rather than managing it through a committee structure, SCO, that would have given Vincent considerably more practical power. She had known it was Vincent. She had not told Dante, because the moment Ty knew, it would become about punishment. And punishment would destroy the thing she actually needed, which was the full shape of what Vincent had built and why. What did he tell you he was trying to accomplish? She said. Philip looked up at her. His eyes were red at the edges, the look of a man who hadn't slept well in longer than he'd admit. He said Dante was going to get the family destroyed. He said the captains had no faith in him anymore, that the 3 outside families were going to move on the organization within a year regardless, and that the only way to survive it was to restructure from the inside before they did. He swallowed. He made it sound like he was saving something. He's not saving anything, she said. He's building a version of this organization that he controls, and he used you to understand how to do it. She stood up. Philip, if you tell Dante what you told me, he will probably kill you. So you're going to tell me everything. Every instruction Vincent gave you, every document you copied, every person you know he contacted inside this house. She looked at him steadily. And in return, I'm going to make sure you're somewhere else when this comes apart. He stared at her. You can do that? I can do a great many things, she said, that people in this house don't know I can do. He talked for 40 minutes. She didn't take notes. She held all of it in her head, the way her mother had taught her, cataloging and sorting as he went. By the time he finished, she had the complete shape of it, and it was worse than she'd thought, and it was also, in a specific and usable way, exactly what she needed. She left his office and stood in the hallway for a moment, with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. Not from distress, from the particular effort of processing too much information at speed and needing 2 seconds to let it settle. Bassett was Vincent's. The 2 early morning calls in the hallway, the deleted corridor footage, all of it traced back through Vincent's network to a plan that was further along than Dante realized, more organized, more embedded. 3 outside families had been promised access to specific Veyron territories in exchange for providing muscle if Dante resisted the restructuring. Marco's 2 a.m. calls had been. She ran the timing again, had been immediately after the first family made contact with Marco directly, testing whether the senior captain could be flipped. Marco had called Dante. Dante had made his own calls and said nothing to her. Everyone in this house was running a separate version of the situation, pushed off the wall and went to find Dante. He was in the garage, which was where he went when he needed to think, without being observed. 3 cars he maintained himself. Partially, physical work of it being something he'd never given up from his 20s, when it was the only way he knew to clear his head. He had his jacket off and his sleeves rolled, and he was standing beside the hood of a black car. She didn't know the make of, not actually working on it, just standing with his hand on it, the way you put your hand on something solid when the ground feels uncertain. Dante, she said. He turned. He read her face immediately, not the expression. Because she was controlling that, but something underneath it, the particular quality of how she was holding herself. What happened? I need to tell you 2 things, she said, in order. You're not going to interrupt. His jaw set. Serafina, not going to interrupt, she said. A pause. Fine. The traitor is Vincent Ray. She said it clean. No building up to it, no softening. He's been working on this for 18 months. He has Bassett inside your security, Philip Crane on the financial records, and at least two other people in this house I'm still identifying. He's made agreements with the Falcone, Morrow, and Sereni families' territorial concessions in exchange for muscle support if you resist. Dante's face had gone still. In a way she'd only seen a handful of times, the complete collapse of the control into something older and more dangerous underneath it. The second thing, she said, before he could move, before he could speak, he's not moving against you yet because of me. Something in his plan depends on how I fit into this, and he hasn't decided how to use it, which means we have a window. She held his gaze, and I need you to hear me. If you move on Vincent right now, you trigger the other three families immediately. You will have an organization at war with itself and three outside enemies all at once, and you will lose. The silence in the garage was absolute. He's family, Dante said. His voice was completely flat. Yes, he's been in this house. He's eaten at my table. Yes, for 18 months, at least. Dante put both hands flat on the hood of the car and stared at them. His breathing was steady, but she could see the effort that steadiness cost the muscles in his forearms, the set of his shoulders. He was fighting the instinct the way you fight a current, all of your energy going into staying in place. What's the window, he said. 48 hours, she said. Maybe less, now that Curtis is gone. Vincent knows we've found one thread. He'll start pulling his people back. She paused. I need to go somewhere tomorrow. Alone. He looked up at her. Where? I need to find out what's in that ring, she said. Before Vincent does. He stared at her for a long moment. Something worked through his face that she couldn't name, not quite fear, not quite grief, not quite the bone-deep weariness of a man who'd been carrying something too long and was only now understanding what it weighed. Marco told you, he said quietly. Marco told me there was something. He assumed you'd found it. She looked at him steadily. You haven't, have you? It wasn't a question. She could see the answer in him in the way his hands pressed harder against the hood in the second and a half he took before answering. No, he said. My father left it to you, Dante said, and his voice was barely above a sound. He told me the night before he died. He said the ring goes to her when you can't anymore. I didn't ask him what he meant. I thought it was the morphine. He looked at her, and his eyes were flat and raw at the same time. I gave it to you at the gala, because I woke up that morning, and I knew I was losing this, and I didn't know what else to do. The garage was very quiet. 48 hours, she said gently. He nodded once. She turned and walked back toward the house, and as she crossed the threshold she made herself keep moving, because if she stopped, she would have to sit with the weight of what Dante had just told her, and she didn't have time for that yet. The ring was in the drawer of her nightstand. She'd put it there the night of the gala and hadn't moved it. She went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and picked it up and turned it over in the lamplight. Crest. The silver worn smooth at the edges from decades of contact. The weight of it, heavier than it looked. She brought it close and looked at the engraving, the Veyron crest she'd seen 100 times, and she found it. In the interior of the band, invisible without magnification, following the curve of the metal, a line of micro-engraved text so small it was more felt than read. She went to the study and found a magnifying glass. She held the ring under the desk lamp and read the inscription. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling for a very long time. When she came back downstairs, Dante was waiting in the hall. He looked at her face and said nothing. Your father changed the succession, she said. It's all in the ring. A legal declaration, witnessed and encoded. Crest is a cipher. She paused. It doesn't name you as heir, Dante. It names me. Dante didn't move. He stood in the hallway with the overhead light, making hard shadows under his eyes, and he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink at the rate that normal people blink, and Serafina watched him process it, the way you watch a building process, A demolition charge, the thing holds its shape for a moment past when it should, and then the shape changes, and it never goes back. Say that again, he said. The inscription in the band is a succession code, she said. It's encoded in the crest pattern. The cipher is in the negative space of the engraving, and it names me as successor if the sitting Dawn is determined to be unfit to protect the family. She kept her voice even. Your father had it done and witnessed by two of the oldest family advocates. It's legally binding under the organization's charter. My father named my wife, Dante said, as the heir to the Veyron organization. Yes, without telling me. He told you the ring goes to her. You said so yourself. His jaw moved, not clenching, more like he was working through the physical sensation of something he couldn't swallow. That's not the same as telling me he'd signed over the succession. No, she agreed. It's not. He turned away from her and walked to the end of the hall and stood there with his hand on the doorframe and his back to her, and she let him have that. She'd needed her own 2 seconds upstairs with the ceiling. She understood the requirement. When he turned back, his face had done the thing she both respected and found quietly terrifying, smoothed itself out, tucked everything beneath the surface, become the face he showed to rooms full of people who were waiting to see if he'd crack. Does Vincent know? He said. I don't know yet. She paused. If he does, it changes everything about his timeline. How? Because if the succession is legally mine, then forcing you out doesn't give Vincent the organization, gives it to me, which means his plan only works if he controls me, or removes me, or she stopped. Thought about Bassett in the hallway. Not her yet. Or delays dealing with me until he's already consolidated enough power that the legal succession doesn't matter anymore. Dante's eyes were very dark. He was going to come for you after. That's my read. You knew this when you were protecting his timeline. His voice had an edge now, not anger at her, something more complicated. You knew he had a plan for you, and you didn't tell me. I didn't know the ring was part of it. I knew I was a variable. Now I know why. She looked at him steadily. We have less than 48 hours, Dante. Possibly much less. Because if Vincent has any access to the same historical charter document that I just used to decode that inscription, he may already know what the ring says. Dante was quiet for 3 seconds. We move tonight, he said. Can't move tonight. We don't have the captains secured. Marco is loyal, but Marco is one man. She stepped forward. I need 24 hours to bring the others in. Carefully, one at a time, so there's no group communication that Bassett can intercept and report. 24 hours is too long. It's what we have. She held his gaze. Let me work. He looked at her for a moment, that long measuring look she'd spent 5 years learning to hold without flinching. Then he said very quietly, my father always said the sharpest thing in any room was the thing nobody thought to look at. She didn't respond to that. She went to make calls. First captain she brought in was a man named Dom Caruso, 58 years old, who ran the family's northern operations and who had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have seen enough chaos to stop being startled by it. She met him at a diner 3 miles from the estate, a booth in the back, coffee neither of them drank. She told him the essentials in 8 minutes. The traitor, the timeline, the 3 outside families, the succession code. She left out the part about Vincent, knowing she wasn't certain enough to say it as fact, and Dom Caruso responded to facts better than to suspicions. He listened without interrupting, which was its own kind of intelligence. When she finished, he turned his coffee cup in a slow circle on the table and said, the ring. Aldo actually did it. She looked at him. You knew about the inscription? I knew Aldo was thinking about it 3 years before he died. He said he was worried about what Dante would be in 10 years, whether the anger would settle or compound. Dom's voice was flat, not unkind. He asked me once if I thought Serafina Vale would survive this life. He glanced up at her, told him yes. She sat with that for a moment. And he never told you he went through with it. He never told anyone things they didn't need to know yet. Dom set down the cup. What do you need from me? I need you with me when I go to Vincent. Not as muscle as witness. Someone who can confirm what happened in front of the other captains. He nodded once. When? Tomorrow evening. I'll send you the location. She drove back and contacted 2 more captains before midnight. Careful calls. Brief. Through channels she'd quietly mapped over 5 years of noting which methods were actually secure and which only felt that way. She didn't sleep. By 3 in the morning she was back at the kitchen table, and the legal pad had a new page, covered in a handwriting that got smaller and denser as the night went on. What she hadn't told Dante, what she hadn't told anyone, was the third thing the inscription had contained. Not just the succession code and her name. There was a second line below it, separate, in a slightly different engraving style, as though added after the original work. The second line read, "Tell him I knew he could be better. Tell him I was right." She'd read it 4 times. She'd turned the ring over in her hands and read it 4 times. She still didn't know whether it was a comfort or a wound, whether Aldo Veyron had loved his son enough to protect him from his own worst nature, or had simply given up on him and dressed the giving up in something gentler. Maybe both. Maybe it was exactly both. She put the pad down and looked at the window and thought about her mother, which she didn't do often, not in ways she permitted herself to feel. Her mother had kept the books for a car dealership and had died of pneumonia at 64, and she had been the sharpest person Serafina had ever known, and the world had never once turned to look at her. Picked the pad back up. It went wrong at 6:47 in the morning. She knew the exact time, because she'd looked at the clock on the kitchen wall, a plain round clock with a white face, the kind of clock that looks institutional, but keeps perfect time when she heard the sound. Not a crash, not voices, a quality of silence that was wrong, the kind of wrong that has a sus, and her body understood it before her mind did. She was out of the kitchen and into the main hallway in 4 seconds. Gregor was at the foot of the main staircase with both hands raised, which was not something she had ever seen Gregor do, and that fact landed in her stomach like a stone dropped from a height. Behind him, on the stairs, were 4 men she didn't recognize, and behind them, descending the stairs with the unhurried pace of a man who had timed his arrival very carefully, was Vincent Ray. He was not what the threat felt like. He was slight, gray-suited, with the face of a senior administrator, neat, composed, the kind of face that belongs in meeting rooms rather than in this hallway with these men. He was 53, and he looked like someone's careful uncle, which was, she understood now, precisely the point. "Serafina," he said. He said her name like they were running into each other at an event. "I'm sorry for the early hour." She looked at Gregor. "Are you all right?" "They came in through the east gate," Gregor said. His voice was perfectly controlled, which was Gregor being as informative as he could manage, with his hands in the air. "The east gate, Bassett's post." "Where's Dante?" she said. "Dante," Vincent said, "coming the rest of the way down the stairs, is with some colleagues in the study. He's not hurt. He'll stay not hurt as long as this conversation goes well." He stopped at a distance that was precise enough to be calculated, close enough to be intimate, far enough to be safe. He'd thought about where to stand. "I was hoping we could talk." "You want to talk," she said. "I've wanted to talk for quite a while. I've been waiting for the right moment." He looked at her with something that was almost curious, the expression of a man who has been doing a calculation and is now seeing the result in person. "You know about the inscription?" It wasn't a question. She held his gaze. "Yes." "When did you work it out?" 2 nights ago." He nodded slowly, the nod of a man revising a timeline. "I found out about the inscription 8 months ago. I've had people working on the cipher for 6. It's elegant. Actually, Aldo always had a talent for making things look simpler than they were." He tilted his head slightly. "You figured it out in 2 days." "I had the ring in my hand." "Yes." Something moved through his expression, not admiration, exactly. But its more utilitarian cousin, assessment. The look of a man updating his estimate of a problem. That's the difficulty, isn't it? As long as you have the ring, the succession is legally yours. As long as the succession is legally yours, I can restructure this organization from dawn to midnight, and the oldest captains will always have a grounds to challenge it. He paused. I need the ring, Serafina. She looked at him for a long moment. The four men behind Gregor were still. The house was very quiet. Somewhere above them, in the study, Dante was in a room with people Vincent had put there, and she had no way to know how many, no way to know the configuration. She drew it into her cardigan pocket and set the ring on the hallway table beside her. Vincent's eyes went to it immediately. She watched him watch it, and she catalogued that the speed of the glance, the quality of his attention. He wanted it badly enough that his self-control slipped for 1 second. That was useful. Before we get into what you want, she said, I need you to understand what you built. He looked back at her. I built a restructuring plan for an organization that your husband is going to drive into the ground within 3 years. You built a coup, she said, using Philip Crane and a maintenance worker and a security guard who couldn't afford his daughter's college tuition. You gave territorial concessions to 3 outside families that you have no authority to give. You made promises in the Veyron name without the ring, without the succession, without any legal standing in this organization. She kept her voice entirely level. And you moved 18 months before you had any of the pieces you needed to actually hold what you'd promised. Because you found out about the inscription, and you realized that if you waited until you'd secured every piece, I'd figure out the ring before you got to me. He was very still. You panicked, she said. 6 months ago, when your cipher team got close to cracking the inscription, you panicked and you moved the timeline up, and now you're standing in this hallway at 6:47 in the morning because you ran out of time, not because your plan worked. His composure was still intact. She could see the work it was taking, but something behind it had shifted. She'd been right about the panic, and he knew she'd been right, and the knowing was changing the room. The ring, he said, is on the table, which means it's in this room, which means we're going to have a conversation about what happens next, because you coming in here with 4 men and Dante under watch is a move you can't walk back. You understand that? I understand the situation perfectly. I don't think you do. She looked at him steadily. Because you don't know what I did last night. And I'm going to tell you because I think you deserve to understand how completely this has already ended. Told him about Dom Caruso. She told him about the 2 other captains. She told him about the calls she'd made through the secure channels that Bassett didn't know about because she'd built those channels herself, quietly, over 3 years, specifically because she'd always known that the estate's official communications were only as secure as the people maintaining them. She did not tell him that Dom Caruso was parked 2 blocks away right now with Marco, Resti, and a 3rd captain she'd brought in at 4 in the morning. She watched Vincent's face as she talked. She watched the composure do its work, and then gradually begin to show the cost of doing that work. He was a meticulous man, running a plan that had required 18 months of patience, and he was learning in real time that the plan had a hole in it the size of the woman standing in front of him. Can't give orders to those captains, he said. The succession isn't active. Dante is still the sitting Don. Succession activates on Dante's written abdication or on a majority captain's vote that he is unfit. She tilted her head. You were going to call a captain's vote. That was your mechanism. You needed enough captains in your column to vote Dante unfit, at which point the succession code in the ring would transfer authority to whoever you designated. She paused. Except the code names me. So you needed to either get rid of the ring or get rid of me before the vote. And you weren't ready to do either yet, so you moved in here to take the ring first. She looked at him. Am I getting this right? He said nothing. His silence, was confirmation, and she could see that he knew it was confirmation. And she could see the moment when he decided that the conversation was no longer the mechanism. He nodded to the two men on his right. The men moved, and Gregor dropped and came up from the floor, moving faster than he had any business moving at his age. And the hallway became a different kind of space, furniture, catching people wrong. The sound of impact and effort, and the particular grunt of a man taking a hit he'd tried to brace for. Serafina stepped back from the hallway table and away from the ring and put the wall at her back, because she was not going to be the thing they used as leverage, not going to be the arm grabbed or the shoulder seized. She watched the room with the specific, focused calm of a woman who had known for 24 hours that something like this was coming, and had therefore seen it stand, and exactly where she would stand, and exactly what she would not do. She would not reach for the ring. That was the most important thing. The ring on the table was bait now, and she was not going to touch it. Gregor put one man down. The second man got Gregor from behind, and it went badly for Gregor in a way that made Serafina's stomach turn a sound she wasn't going to think about. And then there were two men still standing, and Vincent, and Gregor was on the floor not moving, and the hallway was very quiet again. Vincent straightened his jacket. He looked at her. "The ring," he said. She looked at Gregor on the floor. He was breathing. She could see his chest moving. "All right," she said. She walked to the table. She picked up the ring. She held it in her closed fist. "Give it to me," Vincent said. She looked at him and she said, "No, I'm going to put it on." He blinked. It was the first fully uncontrolled response she'd gotten from him in the entire conversation. She slid the ring onto the third finger of her right hand, and she looked at him with the flat, particular clarity of a woman who has moved past the point where fear is useful. "The succession is now active," she said. "Under the Charter's emergency provision, immediate threat to the named successor. In the physical presence of witnesses, the authority transfers on the named successor's acceptance of the symbol." She raised her hand slightly, so the crest was visible. "You just activated it for me. Gregor is a witness. Your men are witnesses." Vincent stared at her. Something in his face moved that she'd never seen in a controlled man's face, the crumble that happens when the architecture gives way. "Can't," he started. "Take me to Dante," she said. He didn't move, Vincent. Her voice was quiet and absolutely without give. "You are standing in front of the head of the Veyron family, and you are refusing a direct instruction. I need you to understand what that means." She looked at the two men behind him. "You two. I need you to understand what that means, and I need you to think about whether the arrangement you have with this man is worth what comes next." The two men looked at each other, looked at Vincent, looked at the ring on her hand. Vincent turned to them and said sharply, "Don't." One of the men stepped back from him. Just one step. Just enough. Serafina walked past Vincent and up the stairs. The study door was closed and she opened it, and there were three men inside, and Dante was in the chair behind the desk, with his hands flat on the surface, not restrained, she noted, just held there by the particular geometry of three men positioned between him and the door. He looked up when she came in, and something moved through his face, with a speed she hadn't seen from him before. "Serafina, it's handled," she said. "We're leaving this room." She looked at the three men. "I'm going to say this once. The man who sent you here no longer has the authority he told you he had. What you do in the next 60 seconds determines everything about what happens to you after." She held up her right hand. The crest caught the morning light coming through the study window. "Go downstairs. Sit, don't touch Gregor." One man left immediately. The other two looked at each other for a long and specific moment, and then they followed. Dante stood up. He came around the desk and he looked at her hand and at the ring and at her face, and he said nothing for a full 3 seconds. "You put it on. Emergency succession provision. I know the provision." He looked at her. "You memorized the charter. I read it 11 months ago." She met his eyes. "I told you. I've been paying attention." He exhaled not a sigh, Something more complicated, the breath of a man releasing something he'd been holding for longer than he'd realized. What do we do with Vincent? We hold him until Dom gets here. She was already moving toward the door. And then we let the captain see him. All of it, the documents, the coded ring, the deals he made with the outside families. She stopped at the threshold. Dante, I need you to do something very specific. What? I need you to walk into that hallway and not touch him. She looked back at him. Whatever he says, whatever he does, you don't touch him. He looked at her for a long moment. His hands were at his sides, and they were perfectly still, which she knew was costing him. Why? Because the moment you do, this becomes about Dante Veyron's anger, she said. And it is not about that. It is about the organization, about what it is and what it's going to be. Captains need to see that. She held his gaze. Can you do that? The silence lasted 4 seconds. Yes, he said. They went into the hallway together. Vincent was at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at them both, at Dante, at Serafina, at the ring on Serafina's hand, and his composure was in pieces now, not dramatically, but in the quiet, specific way of a man who has understood that his calculation was wrong and cannot yet calculate what comes next. Vincent, Dante said. His voice was completely even. Sit down. Vincent looked at Dante's face and he sat down. Dom Caruso arrived 41 minutes later with Marco Resti and the third captain, and he walked through the front door and looked at the scene in the hallway. Vincent, seated, the men arranged. Gregor sitting against the wall with a cloth pressed to his face. Serafina standing with the Veyron crest on her right hand. And he looked at Serafina and said, simply, Aldo was right. She looked at him and she said, let's get the others. But before Dom could answer, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed in a way that made Serafina's chest tighten before he said a single word. It's Resti's man on the perimeter, Dom said, and his voice was very controlled. 3 families. They're moving. He looked up. All 3. Right now, they're coming to the estate. The hallway absorbed that information. Serafina looked at Dante. Dante looked at her. The ring was heavy on her finger, heavier than it had been a minute ago, or maybe she was only now feeling the full weight of what she'd put on. How long, she said. Dom checked the call. 20 minutes. Maybe less. She thought of the captains she hadn't reached yet, the ones still outside this room, the ones who didn't know. She thought of the ring and the charter and the emergency provision and every piece of the plan she'd built over the last 48 hours. She understood with the specific cold clarity of a person whose time has just run out that the plan she'd built was for a different version of this moment. This version was going to require something she hadn't prepared for, something she hadn't been sure she had. She looked at the men in the hallway, Dom, Marco, 2 captains, Gregor against the wall, Vincent seated, the men who'd switched sides in the last hour, and she said, in a voice that was entirely steady, then we don't run. Elena did not put the call on speaker. She stood in the center of the sitting room with the phone against her ear and her other hand man flat against her thigh, and she looked at Dante, while Victor Rain's voice came through the line, unhurried and almost pleasant, the voice of a man who believed he still controlled the tempo of everything happening around him. I've been watching you work, Victor said. I want you to know that. This past week, the way you moved, very clean. Most people in your position would have panicked, made noise. You didn't. What do you want, Mr. Rain? To talk. Actually talk. Not through Marco, not through Bassett. You and me. A pause. Measured. I think we understand each other better than you understand your husband, and I think you know that. Dante was watching her face. She kept it neutral. Where, she said. There's a warehouse on Selby Street. Your husband knows it. It's one of his storage facilities. I've been inside it for 2 hours. Another pause. I have 4 men with me. I'm not asking you to come alone. Bring whoever you trust. Come. Because what I have to say is something you need to hear before you finish what you started tonight at. And once you finish it, this conversation becomes unavailable. He ended the call. Elena lowered the phone. Dante said no. He's already in the warehouse. I don't care where he is. You're not walking into. He called me, Dante. Not you. She looked at him steadily. Called me because he's been watching me work and he's recalculating. He didn't expect me to move this fast. He's trying to open a negotiation before his operation collapses. Or he's pulling you into a building so he can end this quietly and clean. If he wanted that, he wouldn't have called. He'd have just moved. She was already running the geometry Selby Street, the warehouse, 4 men. The fact that Carver's signal was already out, and the 3 operational targets were in the process of going dark. Victor was losing ground in real time, and he knew it. A man losing ground calls for a meeting. A man who wants you dead sends someone to your door. I need Levi, she said. Call him back. Tell him to meet us there. Elena, and get Carver on the phone, and tell him to hold the final move. Don't execute, just hold. 10 minutes. She looked at Dante. We need to hear what Victor says. Dante's jaw worked. He was fighting himself, the part of him that had operated on instinct and controlled aggression for 15 years, against the part that had spent the last 3 days watching Elena be right about things he'd been wrong about. The second part won. He picked up the phone. Selby Street at 9:45 at night was the kind of quiet that a city produces when a neighborhood has decided to stop trying. Loading docks sat empty, floodlights burned out and unreplaced. The street surface cracked at the edges, where the frost had gotten under it. The warehouse was the third one, in a flat-fronted, concrete structure with a rolling door that was halfway up when they arrived. Levi was already outside, 50 feet back. 2 men Elena didn't recognize positioned at the corners in the shadows. He fell into step beside Elena without comment when she walked from the car. 4 inside, Levi said quietly. We counted 3 visible on heat, possibly 1 more in the back. Victor, center of the building, standing, not sitting, that's deliberate. Levi's voice was professionally flat. He wants you to see him standing when you walk in. I know what he wants. She walked toward the rolling door. Dante was on her left, Levi on her right. 2 steps behind them, a man named Gus, one of Levi's people, carrying nothing visible, which meant he was carrying something invisible. Victor Rain was standing exactly where Levi had said he'd be, center of the warehouse floor, under the one working overhead light, which was also deliberate. He was shorter than Elena had expected. Photographs never quite convey the scale of a person, and thinner, with gray at his temples, and the particular posture of a man who has maintained control for so long that the posture is now structural, part of his skeleton. He looked at Elena when she walked in, not at Dante. At Elena. Mrs. Vescari, he said. Mr. Rain. His 4 men were positioned around the perimeter. Clocked them without moving her head. Left wall, right wall, both rear corners. Professional spacing. Nobody had a weapon visible, which meant 4 weapons were invisible. You've been busy, Victor said. You called this meeting, she said. Talk. He looked at her for a moment, with something she read as genuine appreciation, not the performative kind. The kind a man produces when he's encountered a problem he underestimated and is recalibrating his respect for the office. I want to offer you a way out of what's about to happen. There's nothing about to happen to me. There is, he said. You've moved the 3 contacts. That was smart, faster than I planned for. But you haven't solved the ledger problem. He paused. Marco made a copy. The air in Elena's chest went cold. Before you secured it this morning, Victor said. Marco accessed the Hendricks Properties login and pulled the transaction records you used to authenticate the ledger's sequence. He didn't get the document itself you had, that locked in Commerce Street, and he couldn't reach it in time. But he got enough of the authentication trail to give my legal team what they need to challenge any action you take under the ledger's authority. A slight movement at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, which means if you try to use it to restructure the organization's control, I can test it publicly. And then this entire document, the real ownership map of the Vescari Empire, goes into a legal proceeding where it becomes visible to people who would very much like to know what's in it. Dante had gone very still beside her. She could feel it without looking at him, the quality of his stillness, the held breath of a man who is doing the math and doesn't like what it adds up to. "What are you proposing?" Elena said. Her voice was entirely flat. "Partition," Victor said. "You keep the core Vescari holdings, the legitimate business structure, the properties, the financial framework. I take the operational relationships, the port, the councilman, the detective, those three pieces." He opened his hand slightly, a gesture of reasonableness. "The organization survives. You survive. The ledger stays sealed. Stop being a problem." Elena looked at him. "You'd have Marco," she said. "Marco serves his purpose and becomes retired." Victor said it without inflection. He knew the arrangement was temporary. She let the silence sit for a moment. Behind her, she heard Levi shift his weight. The smallest movement, a man staying ready. "That's not a partition," she said. "That's amputation. You take the three relationships. This organization has no protection and no reach. We become a legitimate business structure with no ability to function in the world we actually operate in. In 18 months, we're dead anyway, just slower. In 18 months, the landscape will have changed. In 18 months, you will have absorbed everything that kept this organization viable, and we will have nothing left to negotiate with." She took one step forward. Just one. "You're not offering a deal. You're offering us the privilege of watching you take everything, while we thank you for not taking it all at once." Victor looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, the appreciation sharpening into something harder. "Then we have a problem." "We have a problem," she agreed. His right hand moved, barely a micro gesture, fingers spreading slightly at his side. Elena had studied people for 4 years, in rooms where the wrong read meant disaster. She read it correctly, she said. "Levi." The warehouse lights went out. Not a power failure, a cut. Precise and pre-planned. Levi's man at the junction box outside, who had been waiting for exactly the word. 4 seconds of absolute dark, the kind of dark that a concrete building with no windows produces. Total and disorienting. Elena dropped to one knee, because she was the primary target, and a standing target in sudden darkness is a dead one. She heard movement on her right, one of Victor's men crossing the floor faster than he should have been able to, which meant he'd been expecting the dark too, which meant Victor had planned for this contingency. She heard Dante make a sound sharp, involuntary, and then a struggle in the dark, 3 feet to her left, the particular sound of 2 bodies making contact. The emergency lighting kicked in on a 12-second delay, a dim red glow from the exit signs that turned the warehouse into something that looked like the inside of a threat. Elena was already moving, staying low, using the outlines. Could see Victor, still standing in his original position, which told her he'd done exactly what she'd done, and stayed put in the dark, knowing his men knew where he was, and hers didn't. Goss had one of Victor's men against the left wall. She could see the shape of it. Levi was somewhere at the rear. Dante was on the floor. She could see that now, struggling upright, and the man who'd hit him was moving toward Victor's position. She crossed the floor in 8 steps and put herself between the moving man and Victor, pulled up short. He was big, wide through the shoulders, with the flat expression of someone who does this as a job and not a passion. He looked at her standing in front of Victor and did the calculation. "Move," he said. "No," she said. It was a gamble. Everything in the next 4 seconds was a gamble. She was betting that Victor had told his people not to touch her, that she was the asset. That she was the person he needed functional for a negotiation, and that the instruction hadn't been rescinded yet because Victor hadn't given the signal. The man looked at Victor. Victor said, "Stand down." The man stepped back. Elena turned to face Victor. Her heart was running hard. and she let it. There was nothing to be gained from pretending this was controlled. That was a test, she said. Everything is a test, Victor said. He looked past her at the warehouse, at his scattered men, and her scattered people, at Dante getting to his feet with blood at his lip, and the expression of a man who is going to have opinions about this later. You passed it. Your instinct was to position between me and the threat rather than run. That's interesting. I'm not interested in being interesting to you. No. He looked at her directly. You're interested in winning, which is why I'm going to tell you something true. And I need you to hear it before your man, Carver, finishes the job you sent him to do. He paused. The authentication trail Marco pulled, it's real. He did copy it. But it's not enough to challenge the ledger in court on its own. My legal team was overstating the case. What would Dean need to? It would take 6 months of litigation minimum, and during those 6 months your organization would function normally under the ledger's authority. Elena stared at him. Why are you telling me that? Because I want you to understand what kind of man I am, Victor said. I've been at this for 10 years. I've dismantled 4 organizations in this city and absorbed 2 more. I'm not reckless, and I'm not a slight pause, something moving behind his eyes. I am not going to win this one. He said it with the precision of a man making an accurate statement he finds genuinely unpleasant. You move too fast. The contacts are dark. Paris is burned. Marco is spent. And you're standing in my contingency location with the ledger in a bank I can't reach and the pendant code in your jacket. He looked at her jacket pocket. So I want to tell you the truth about one more thing. Say it, Sabrina, he said. Elena kept her face still. She's not what you think she is, Victor said. Or rather, she's more than you think. When she came to you, she told you she'd been working against me, that she'd infiltrated Dante's circle to expose my operation. He paused. What she didn't tell you is that she came to me first. The floor shifted again. 8 months ago, Victor said, Sabrina Vale walked into one of my facilities and told me she wanted to destroy the Vescari organization. She offered me information, operational details, structural vulnerabilities, the names of captains who could be turned. His eyes were on Elena's face, reading it. I took the meeting. I assessed her. And then I told her no. You told her no, Elena repeated, because I knew she was running a counter-operation. The daughter of a man I'd broken 15 years ago doesn't walk into my building out of ambition. She walks in to find out the shape of what she's working against. He tilted his head slightly. So I let her go, and I watched her. I watched her work her way into Dante's life and into the access structure, and every time I thought she was about to expose me, she did something that seemed instead to serve my operation, accepting the pendant, maintaining the appearance of loyalty. Confused me for months. He paused, until I realized she wasn't confused. She had 2 targets the entire time, me and Dante, and she was using me to destroy one, while she used you to destroy the other. Elena's mind was running fast, running it against what Sabrina had told her. Months. The pendant, the flash drive assembled and ready. The way Sabrina had said, I didn't do this for Dante. She told me everything she was doing, Elena said carefully. Told you the version that made you trust her, Victor said. The version where she was your ally against me. And she is your ally against me. Genuinely. But the ledger, Mrs. Vescari. Think about the ledger. He leaned forward slightly. Why would Sabrina know about the pendant's compartment? How would she know that the pendant contained an access code? Dante never told anyone. It was a secret between him and you. His eyes were steady, unless someone told her. Someone with access to the early years of the Vescari marriage. Someone who knew both the structure of the organization and the details of your husband's most private arrangements. Elena's chest was tight. Marco, she said. Marco, Victor confirmed. Sabrina and Marco have known each other for 2 years. I don't know the nature of the relationship. I've never been able to establish whether it's operational or personal or both. But they have contact, regular contact. which means when Marco was feeding me information about the Vescari structure, he may also have been feeding information to Sabrina about things she shouldn't know. He paused. Or Sabrina was feeding it to Marco, and Marco was using it to keep her operation hidden inside mine. Elena thought about Sabrina sitting across from her at the restaurant table. "How long have you known?" Sabrina had said. When Elena mentioned Christine Rain, the question of a person who has been waiting for a door to open. But what if the door hadn't opened naturally? What if the door had been left open deliberately by someone who wanted Elena to walk through it and find exactly the ally she was looking for? "You're trying to put doubt in my mind," Elena said, "about the only asset I have who isn't compromised. I'm trying to tell you that the asset you have may have a set of objectives that go beyond yours," Victor said. "She wants me gone, that's real. She wants Dante diminished, I believe that's real. But what she wants after that, what she intends to do once you've used the ledger and restructured the organization's authority." He spread his hands. "I don't know, and I don't think you do either." The warehouse was quiet. Dante was on his feet, saying nothing, which was the most useful thing he'd done all week. Levi was at the edge of the red light, watching. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She took it out. A text from Sabrina's number. "The port contact has been reapproached, not by your people. Someone else got there first. He's been offered a different arrangement. You need to move now." Elena read it twice. "Someone is running a third operation," she said. Not to Victor to herself out loud, because saying it made it real, and she needed it real. Victor's eyes sharpened. "What?" She looked up at him. "You didn't reapproach the port contact. My people are standing in this building, and Carver is holding the final execute." She looked at Dante. Who else knew about the 3 targets? Who else knew those were the 3 relationships we needed to protect? Dante's face was doing arithmetic. "The 4 captains," he said. "Levi, Caruso, Trent, DeMaio," Levi said from the edge of the light. His voice was very quiet. Everyone looked at him. "DeMaio was the last to arrive tonight," Levi said. He asked which 3 contacts we were protecting before Elena named them. I thought he was clarifying. He wasn't clarifying. Cold thing in Elena's chest, compressed in something smaller and harder. DeMaio had been with the Vescari organization for 16 years. He was not on the financial trail Carver had pulled. He was not in any of Sabrina's documentation. He was not in Victor's known network, which meant he had been operating entirely separately, waiting the way a patient man waits for exactly the moment when the board cleared, and the position he wanted became available. Not Victor's asset, not Marco's his own. Elena looked at Victor. "We have a mutual problem," she said. Victor looked back at her. The man who had spent 10 years trying to dismantle the Vescari organization looked at the woman who had spent 1 week holding it together. And he said, "I'm listening." Elena's phone buzzed again. This time it was Carver. "Something's wrong at Commerce Street. Someone's at the bank." Her pulse spiked hard. The bank. The ledger was in the bank. She was across the warehouse floor and moving toward the door before she'd made a conscious decision to move. Dante at her shoulder, Levi 2 steps behind. The logistics of what she'd just started rearranging in her head at a speed that left no room for anything except the next 30 seconds. She hit the rolling door and the cold outside air, and she was running. The Millgate Road property was a converted warehouse that the Veyron family had used for storage logistics 3 years ago and quietly decommissioned when the northern distribution routes shifted. Serafina knew this because she had read the asset inventory twice in her first year of marriage, the way she read everything that passed through the household thoroughly, without announcing that she'd read it, and with the specific intention of remembering it in case it became useful later. It was useful now. She knew the layout. 2 entry points on the ground floor, a mezzanine level, with partial sightlines to the main floor. A loading dock on the east side that could be accessed from the alley, without crossing the main approach. She described it to Dom in the car, from memory, without notes, and Dom listened with the focused silence of a man who has learned not to be surprised by what Serafina Vale knows. There were 4 cars. Dante was in the second one with Marco. She'd asked him once to let Dom's people go in first, and he'd looked at her in a way that made it clear. The asking was a courtesy he appreciated but couldn't honor, and she'd accepted that. There were things you could ask Dante Veyron to do, and things that were outside the range of what he was built for. Staying behind while his organization moved on a threat was outside the range. She'd accepted it. She'd also put herself in the first car. They hit the loading dock at 11:14. 4 of Dom's men on the east approach. Marco's 2 on the main door. Serafina and Dom through the dock, with Gregor behind them. Gregor, who had no business being on his feet with his face in that condition, but who had simply gotten into the car without discussion, and whom she had decided not to spend energy arguing with, because the energy was needed elsewhere. The dock door was unlocked. That was the first wrong thing. She registered it and kept moving and filed it. The main floor of the warehouse was lit by overhead work lights, 3 of them functional, 1 dead, making the space a pattern of bright and shadow. Shelving units still in place from the logistics operation, mostly empty, some with old inventory she didn't stop to identify. The air smelled of dust and old metal and something chemical she couldn't name. 6 men, Gregor had said. She counted 4 on the main floor as she came through the dock. 2 more somewhere mezzanine, probably. She kept low and kept moving and trusted Dom's people on the east approach to handle what she couldn't see. What she hadn't counted on was Vincent being in the center of the room rather than at the back of it. He was standing under the brightest of the work lights, and he was alone in that lit space. And the staging of it was so deliberate that she stopped moving for 1 full second just to understand what she was looking at. Vincent Ray, stripped of rank 3 hours ago, standing in the middle of a warehouse in a posture that was not frightened and not defiant patient. He was standing like a man who had been waiting and was now watching something arrive that he'd been expecting. Voss was on the mezzanine. She found him with her eyes above and to the left at the railing, looking down. "Serafina," Vincent said. His voice carried easily in the empty space. "I wondered if you'd come yourself or send people." "Came myself," she said. She was still moving slowly, angling toward the cover of the nearest shelving unit, and Dom was doing the same on her right. And she trusted that her people were doing what they were doing in the parts of the building she couldn't see. "That's the difference," Vincent said. "Between you and Dante." He didn't raise his voice. He was talking at conversation volume, which meant he either didn't care who heard or he'd already assessed the room and decided it didn't matter. "Dante sends people, you come." "Dante is here," she said. "I know." He didn't look toward the main entrance, which meant he had someone watching it. "He's outside with Marco." 4 cars. He tilted his head slightly. "I counted." She stopped moving. She was behind a shelving unit now, partial cover sightline to Vincent, and a partial on the mezzanine. She looked at him across the distance between them, and she said, "The unlocked door." "I wanted you to be able to get in," he said. "I'm not interested in a firefight, Serafina. I'm interested in a conversation." "We had a conversation." "We had you managing a room." He said it without contempt, more like a correction. "That's different. You're very good at managing rooms. You're very good at reading people and giving them the version of the situation that moves them where you need them to go." He looked at her steadily. "But there are things you didn't tell Dante tonight, and there are things you don't know yet, and I'd like to have a conversation about those things before this ends badly for people who don't deserve it." She looked at him. She looked at Voss on the mezzanine. She looked at the 4 men on the floor who had weapons and were positioned in a pattern she was still mapping. "Talk," she said. "Voss," Vincent said, "is not here because I asked him. I want to be clear about that." He glanced up at the mezzanine briefly. "Voss came to me because the Sereni leadership didn't send him here to participate in my plan. They sent him here as an observer, to report back on what the Veyron organization actually is, post-transition, before the Sereni family decides whether your restructured organization is something they want a relationship with or something they want to move against before it stabilizes. Process that in about 2 seconds. He's not Sereni muscle. He's Sereni intelligence. Correct. Vincent's voice was still even, which means the 6 men he brought with him are not here to fight. They're here to bear witness. He paused. The Sereni family is the largest of the 3. If they decide to move against you, the Falconi and Morrow will follow, regardless of what you said to Ardell and Cicero this afternoon. What Voss reports back in the next 24 hours determines whether you have 6 months to stabilize your organization or 6 weeks before you're fighting on 3 fronts. The warehouse was very quiet. Somewhere outside, she could hear the faint sound of a car engine, distant, probably Marco repositioning. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because I'm not your enemy," he said. "I know that's not how tonight looks. I know it's not how the last 18 months look." He looked at her, and something in his expression was older and tireder than anything she'd seen on his face for the actual face of the man under the meticulous planning, the thing the planning had been constructed to hide. "I love this organization. I have loved it for 30 years. I watched Aldo build it, and I worked alongside that building, and I believed in what it was." His voice didn't waver, but something in it was thin, like a surface that has been worn down past its protective layer. "When Aldo died and Dante took the chair, I spent 2 years hoping I was wrong about what I saw. I spent 18 months trying to fix what I couldn't stop being afraid of." He looked at his hands briefly. "I was wrong about how to fix it. I was not wrong about the fear." She held very still. "You are what he hoped for," Vincent said. "Not Dante, you. I think Aldo knew that when he changed the inscription. I think he saw something in you that nobody else was looking for." He looked at her directly. "I am asking you, not as a man with leverage, not as a threat. I am asking you to let Voss do what the Sereni sent him to do. Let him watch you tonight. Let him go back and report what you are." He paused. "If you bring me out of this warehouse in handcuffs, Voss reports chaos. If you walk out of here with this resolved, he reports stability. He let that land. You need him to report stability." She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that she heard Dom shift his weight to her right. A small sound. The sound of a patient man waiting for a cue. "What do you want in return?" she said. "Nothing." He said it simply. "I told you. I'm not your enemy." She looked at Voss on the mezzanine. He was very still up there, watching. His face doing the thing that young intelligence people's faces do when they're trying to look neutral and are mostly succeeding. She thought about what Vincent had said, not the content of it, but the fact of it. A man who had just lost everything coming to a warehouse, not to fight, but to give her information she needed. A man who had spent 30 years loving something he'd been willing to burn because he was afraid it was going to burn anyway. She thought about Aldo Veyron writing 2 lines into the interior of a ring and never explaining either of them to anyone. Session code and a message, and 30 years of patience wrapped around both of them like a coat. "Voss," she said, loud enough to carry to the mezzanine. He looked down. "Come down," she said. "I want to talk to you face to face." He came down. He was younger up close than he'd looked from a distance, late 20s, maybe 30, with the careful composure of someone who'd been trained to observe without reacting, and who was still that the training showed as effort rather than habit. He stopped at a respectful distance and looked at her. "You're going to go back to the Sereni leadership," she said, "and you're going to tell them what you saw tonight. All of it, this warehouse, Vincent, the conversation, the ring, the captains this afternoon." She held his gaze. "Tell them the truth. I'm not asking you to shade it. Tell them exactly what you saw." She paused. "And tell them that when they want to have a legitimate conversation, about a relationship between their organization and mine, they should reach out directly, through proper channels. To me, Voss looked at her. He looked at the ring on her hand. He nodded once, a small, precise nod, the kind that means the information has been received and will be transmitted accurately. "You can leave," she said. He left. His 6 men followed him out the east side. The warehouse lost a significant amount of tension when they went, the way a room loses heat when a window opens. She looked at Vincent. "You need to disappear," she said. "Completely. Not the city, the life. New name, new location, nothing that connects back to this organization." She kept her voice level. "If you surface in connection with any of the 3 families, or with anyone who has a grievance with the Veyron name, that ends differently than tonight." She paused. "Can you do that?" He looked at her for a moment. "Then yes. Then go." He went. Dante came through the main door 30 seconds later. He looked at the empty warehouse, at the men along the walls, lowering their weapons, at Dom standing down, at Serafina in the middle of the floor, with the ring on her hand, and an expression he couldn't fully read. "What happened?" he said. "It's done," she said. He looked around the space again. "Where's Vincent?" "Gone." She started toward him. "I'll explain in the car. All of it." She held his gaze. Voss was serene intelligence, not muscle. Vincent knew about it, and he gave us the information before we came in. She watched Dante's face work through that, the initial resistance, the familiar surge of the instinct toward anger, and then the harder, slower thing that had been developing in him all night, things she'd watched happen by degrees and wasn't sure he was aware of. He was listening. She kept going. "If I'd brought Vincent out in front of Voss's people, the Sereni report goes back as chaos. We needed Voss to see resolution." She paused. "He did." Dante was quiet for a moment. "Then, you made that call without asking me." "Yes." Another pause. "Was it the right call?" "I think so." She held his gaze. "I won't always know in advance, but I think so." He nodded. Slowly. The kind of nodding is a man accepting a situation he wouldn't have chosen, and finding that the acceptance doesn't cost him what he thought it would. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They walked out of the warehouse together. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning that was cold and clear, in the particular way of early winter, Serafina called a full captain's meeting at the Bellacorte estate. All 14 captains came. Every one of them, which was itself a statement. She hadn't required attendance. She'd requested it. And there was a difference. And the fact that they'd all come meant the difference had registered. She'd spent the 3 weeks since Millgate Road doing the work that didn't make noise, talking to each captain individually, learning the specific texture of each man's loyalty and each man's grievances and each man's practical concerns about the organization's direction. She'd read every piece of financial documentation she could get her hands on. She'd talked to Dom for 4 hours about the northern operations, and to Marco for 3 hours about the external relationship structure, and to Gregor, whose face had healed, but whose left eye still sat slightly lower than it had before, a permanent record of that morning about the security architecture that needed to be rebuilt. She knew by the time the 14 men sat down in the Bellacorte dining room what she was going to say. She'd known for about a week. She'd been waiting until she was certain. She could say it without it sounding like a speech. Dante sat at the far end of the table. Not at the head, she was at the head, but at the far end, which was its own statement, and one he'd made without being asked to make it. She looked at the 14 men, and she said, "I'm not going to run this organization through fear." The room was quiet and attentive. She continued, "Fear works until it doesn't, and when it stops working, everything built on it comes down at once. You've all seen it." She looked across the table. "What I'm going to ask from this organization is loyalty to the family itself, not to me, not to Dante, not to any one person, to the institution, to the thing that has survived for 60 years because the people inside it understood the difference between protecting what they had and consuming what they had, She paused. The alliance Vincent built with the three outside families is dissolved. The territorial concessions he promised are null. We are going to rebuild three of those external relationships from scratch, through legitimate negotiation, and I'm going to need people in this room to do that work. She looked at Dom, then at Marco, then at Ferraro. Not my people. The organization's people. Dom nodded. One of the older captains, a man named Riss, who hadn't spoken in any of her individual conversations, but who had a reputation for saying very little and weighing a great deal, looked at her and said, "The succession. The charter provision, does it stay active?" "Yes," she said. "And Dante?" She looked at Dante at the far end of the table. He was looking back at her with an expression she'd seen in the garage, at the window, in the kitchen at 2 in the morning with a cold cup of coffee, the expression of a man who is in the presence of something he doesn't entirely know how to categorize, but has stopped, trying to resist. "Dante remains," she said, "not as a figurehead and not as a subordinate, as the person in this organization who understands its external relationships better than anyone in this room, because he's been in them for 15 years and he knows every family we deal with at a level of depth that can't be replicated." She held Reese's gaze. "We don't waste what works. We stop pretending that the only kind of strength is the kind that sits at the head of the table." Rice nodded. It was a slow nod, the nod of a man who has had a position confirmed rather than a new one presented. "All right," he said. It wasn't the dramatic moment she might have expected from a room full of men in that business. There was no ceremony to it, no explicit declaration of allegiance. What happened was more ordinary and more real than that. The men at the table began talking about the work, the Northern Corridor, the Falcone relationship, the financial restructuring, the 2 open positions in the security architecture. They talked about it the way people talk about work when they've accepted who's running the meeting and have moved past the question of whether to have it. She listened and she directed and she made notes on a legal pad. And at some point she noticed that nobody at the table was looking at Dante for confirmation before responding to her, and that this had happened without anyone deciding to let it happen. It had simply become the shape of the room. The meeting ran 4 hours. When it ended and the captains had gone, she sat alone at the dining room table for a few minutes with the legal pad and the accumulated notes of 4 hours of practical conversation about an organization she was now responsible for in ways she was still measuring. Dante came back into the room. He hadn't left the estate. She'd heard him in the study during the meeting, taking calls, handling the external work she'd described, doing what he was actually good at. Came in with coffee, as he had 3 weeks ago in the kitchen, and set a cup in front of her. He sat down. Not at the far end, this time 2 chairs away from her, which was a different kind of statement. "Rice will be a problem eventually," he said. "Maybe," she said. "He's also the most experienced captain in the room, and the most respected by the older ones. He's useful before he's a problem." She looked at him. "I'll deal with it when it's a problem." Dante looked at his coffee. "My father," he started and stopped. Started again. "I've been trying to figure out if I'm angry at him." She waited. "I keep landing in the same place," he said. "I think he was right. I think if I'm honest about the last 5 years, about the decisions I made, the way I ran rooms, the times the anger got into things it shouldn't have gotten into." He stopped, looked at the table. "I think he was right, and I think he loved me enough to find a way to protect the thing I would have damaged, and I don't know whether to be grateful for that or devastated by it." She looked at him for a long moment. "I think," she said slowly, "that it can be both." He nodded. "He wrote something else," she said. She'd told him the second line that night, in the kitchen, but she wanted to say it again now, in this room, in daylight, without the urgency of everything that had been pressing on them. "Tell him I knew he could be better. Tell him I was right." She paused. "I've been thinking about what that means. Whether he meant better than he had been, or better than he would have become." She held Dante's gaze. "I think he meant there was a version of you that was possible. not guaranteed possible. And I think he believed in it enough to build the insurance around it. Dante was quiet for a long moment. His hands were around the coffee cup, and his eyes were doing something she'd seen very rarely, the actual thing, underneath everything else, unmanaged, unperformed. "What do you think?" he said. Not what he thought. "What do you think?" She considered the question, the way she considered everything thoroughly, without rushing to the answer that would be easiest to say. "Think you sat across a legal pad from me at 2 in the morning and you read staff schedules," she said. "I think you told your men what I said goes, and you meant it, and the room knew you meant it." She looked at him. "I think a man who can't be better doesn't do those things." He looked at her. The morning light was coming through the dining room windows at a low winter angle, falling across the table and the legal pad, and the ring on her right hand, and the coffee cups between them. And outside the Bellacorte estate, the grounds were quiet, the gates closed, the perimeter running its rotation. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not the hand with the ring, the other one. He didn't say anything. She looked at his hand on hers, and she didn't move it. And for a minute, the room was simply what it was. Two people sitting at a table in the aftermath of something that had cost them both, not exactly the same way, but honestly. In the weeks that followed, she did the work. She rebuilt the Northern Corridor relationship with Dom doing the negotiation on the ground and her directing it from above. The way you direct water through a landscape you've mapped in advance. She brought the financial architecture through a restructuring that Philip Crane, in his absence, had inadvertently made easier by documenting everything so thoroughly. His maps of the organization turned out to be as useful to her as they'd been to Vincent, more so, because she knew which pieces to keep and which to dismantle. She brought Gregor's security rebuild through, in 3 phases, the last of which introduced protocols she'd been thinking about for 2 years and had never had the standing to suggest. She talked to every captain twice. She learned the specific way each man's loyalty was shaped, what it was attached to, what threatened it, what reinforced it, and she worked with the shape rather than against it, the way you work with the grain of wood rather than across it. The Serini family made contact 6 weeks later, through proper channels. To her, they sent a senior representative, not Voss, someone older, with a measured face and careful eyes, and the conversation lasted 3 hours and established the beginning of a relationship built on accurate information rather than Vincent's promises, which was slower and less spectacular and considerably more durable. Voss had reported stability. She'd known he would. On a Friday evening in late winter, she walked the estate's east grounds alone, which she sometimes did in the hour before the light went entirely, the long walk around the property's perimeter, inside the fence, the route she'd learned in her first month as a Veyron wife and had walked perhaps 200 times since. The grounds looked the same, as they always had: the stone, the old trees, the long lines of the fence, but the quality of walking them was different now, in a way she couldn't entirely articulate. She was near the east gate when she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Dante, hands in his jacket pockets, moving at the same pace she'd been moving. "Following me," she said. "I'm walking," he said. Same direction. She turned back and kept going, and he fell into step beside her. They walked in silence for a while, the way people walk together when they've stopped needing the silence filled. "The Serini meeting," he said. 3 weeks ago. What about it?" "Their rep came back to me separately," he said. 2 days after," he said. He paused. "He said they'd heard through various channels about the gala, about the ring, about what I did." He was quiet for a moment. "He said the families have been trying to figure out what it meant, whether it was a show of weakness or something else." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I gave my wife the family symbol because I'd made a mistake in thinking the symbol was mine to hold." He glanced at her. "I told him I was correcting the mistake." She looked at him. He was looking ahead at the line of the fence and the last of the light going out of the sky above it. His profile in the winter light was the same face she'd spent 5 years studying across rooms and tables, and 100 ordinary distances, and she knew it the way you know something you've looked at long enough, not perfectly, not completely, but with the specific depth that comes from sustained attention. "Was that what you were doing?" she said. "At the gala? Correcting a mistake?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was doing something I didn't have a name for," he said. "I woke up that morning, and I knew something had to change, and I didn't know how to change it the right way. So I did the only thing I could think of that was irreversible." She thought about that. An irreversible gesture. Yes. He looked at her. "Because if I could take it back, I would have. I would have gotten frightened and taken it back. I needed it to be the kind of thing you can't undo." He paused. "I needed someone to hold me to it." She looked at him. The grounds were very quiet, and the light was almost gone, and somewhere near the north wall one of the pergola was completing his rotation, the sound of footsteps, at a distance ordinary and unhurried. "Your father wrote the succession into the ring 11 years ago," she said. "He never told you because he knew you'd argue with it. He knew you'd fight it, or refuse it, or find some way to make it into a different kind of story than he intended." She looked at Dante steadily. "He trusted you to do the right thing without knowing it was the right thing." Dante stopped walking. She stopped with him. "He gave the ring to you," she said, "because somewhere underneath everything, underneath the anger and the control and the way you learned to run rooms, you knew something that he knew, that the symbol had to go to whoever could carry what it actually means." She paused. "You didn't give the Mafia a gesture, Dante. You gave them a chance to find out what they actually had." He looked at her for a long time. The winter air was cold and still, and the last light was a line at the edge of the sky. "I spent 5 years not looking at you," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm looking now." "I know that too," she said. She turned and kept walking, and after a moment he turned with her, and they went the rest of the way around the estate's perimeter, together in the dark, at the same unhurried pace, while inside the Bella courthouse the lights came on one by one in the rooms where the work went on. The ring was on her hand. It would stay there, not because she needed what it meant, because she'd earned what it cost. She stopped at the east gate on the way back. Not for any particular reason, she just stopped. The way you stop at a place you've passed 100 times, and suddenly feel the weight of it differently. The gate was iron, old, repainted twice in the years she'd been here. She put her hand on it and felt the cold of the metal through her palm and stood there for a moment, with the dark at her back and the lit windows of the house ahead of her. Dante stopped beside her. He didn't ask why she'd stopped. That was new than not asking. The willingness to stand still in a place without needing to know the reason for it. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly, and filed it in the part of her that kept track of what had changed. What was considerable. She was considerable. She thought about Philip Crane, somewhere she didn't know, living something smaller and safer than what he'd nearly destroyed himself participating in. She thought about Bassett, who had needed his daughter's tuition, paid badly enough to make a choice he couldn't unmake, and who was now simply gone from the architecture of her days. She thought about Curtis, the maintenance man with the uncle in the wrong family, who had been the first thread she'd pulled, and who had probably already built a new life in a city that had no knowledge of the Veyron name. She thought about Vincent. She thought about Vincent more than she'd told anyone. Not with sympathy. Exactly, sympathy wasn't the right word for what she felt when she turned that particular thing over. What she felt was closer to recognition. A man who had seen something he loved heading toward damage and had responded with control, with architecture, with an 18-month plan built on the premise that he knew better than everyone else what needed to happen. She understood the impulse. Spent 5 years in this house, operating on her own version of it, quieter, less destructive, but the same fundamental belief that she could see things others couldn't, and that seeing them gave her the responsibility to manage them. The difference, she thought, was that she'd been right. She was honest enough with herself to know that was a thin line. "What are you thinking?" Dante said. "That Vincent wasn't wrong about everything," she said. Quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "he wasn't. He was wrong about the method. He was wrong about what the organization needed. He was wrong about me, specifically, for a long time." She looked at the gate, but he was right that something had to change. He was right that the way this family was operating was going to bring it down eventually. She paused. He just couldn't trust the change to happen without him engineering it. That's what broke it. Dante turned that over in silence. "Your father trusted it," she said. "He put the succession in the ring, and he died, and he left it to happen in whatever time it was going to happen. He didn't try to engineer the moment." She finally looked at Dante. That took more courage than anything Vincent did in 18 months of planning. Dante looked at her. In the half-light from the estate windows, his face was open in the way it had learned to be, not stripped, not without its history, but no longer armored in the way it had been. "He trusted you," Dante said. "He barely knew you." "He trusted what he saw," she said. "There's a difference." She took her hand off the gate, and they walked back toward the house together. The gravel was loud under their feet in the winter quiet, and the light from the windows fell across the steps in warm rectangles. And somewhere inside the house, she could hear the low sound of a television in one of the back rooms, Maria watching something, ordinary and unhurried, the sound of a house that was simply a house at the end of a long day. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at the house, at the stone facade, the lit windows, the front door with its heavy iron hardware that she had walked through more times than she could count. It was, she thought, the same house it had always been. But she was not the same woman who had first walked through that door as Dante Bayron's wife, quiet and watchful, and carrying 5 years of careful attention like something she was holding, in trust for a future she couldn't yet name. That woman had been waiting. She was done waiting. She went up the steps and through the door. Later that night, long after Dante had gone to sleep, she sat at the kitchen table one more time with the legal pad. Not working, the working was done for the day. She sat with it the way she sometimes sat with the book she'd finished and hadn't quite put down yet, holding it while the end settled. She turned the ring on her finger. She'd stopped noticing its weight, which was itself a kind of answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. She thought about her mother, the woman in the cardigan, who kept the books for a card dealership, and who knew everything and was asked about none of it, and who had given her daughter 2 things, the habit of watching, and the warning that watching without acting was its own kind of slow disappearance. She had not disappeared. She pulled the legal pad toward her and wrote one thing on a clean page, not for anyone else, not for the record, just for the act of writing it down. She wrote, "I was here." She looked at it for a moment. Then she put the pen down and turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs to the room that was hers, in the house that was hers, and she slept without dreaming, which was the best sleep she'd had in 5 years. In the morning, she woke before Dante and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, while it was still mostly dark outside, watching the perimeter lights do their slow circuit of the grounds. The ring caught the light from the window. The crest was visible for a moment. The Bayron name, the family symbol, the cipher that held its secret only for people who knew to look for it. She drank her coffee and let the dark give way to morning. The work was waiting. It was always waiting, and she had learned, in the long hard semester of the last few months, that she did not resent it, that the work was in fact the thing she was built for, had always been built for, in the way certain structures are built for specific loads and hold them not with effort, but with the particular satisfaction of a thing doing the precise thing it was designed to do. She was still at the window when she heard Dante's footsteps on the stairs. He came into the kitchen. He looked at her, at the window, at the coffee, at the ring. He didn't say anything. He poured himself a cup and came to stand beside her, and they both looked out at the Bellacorte grounds, coming slowly into the gray winter light. The gate was closed. The perimeter was running. The house was quiet and intact behind them. "Ready?" he said. She looked out at the morning. "Yes," she said.